I come from a sort of a corporate background, and my corporate background forced me to work a lot of hours, and I think I was in the same boat as many people are, working many, many hours and not having the ability to sit back and relax and think about what's best to do in your life, because you only have so many hours left. And what I'd like to see for Portland is I'd like to see everybody plant a chestnut out in their front yard. Everybody. Chestnuts all over the whole city. So it'll be like the turn of the century, 1890s, around there. In the Appalachians, the American chestnut was such an incredible crop of chestnuts that people could make a living in 2 weeks of harvesting chestnuts, and then they could take the rest of the year off. So wouldn't that be wonderful if our city could just feed itself like that and plant chestnuts or walnuts? Walnuts are a really nice crop. And have walnuts and chestnuts all over the city, so we'll be the nut capital of the world. And we all have to just worry about harvesting a couple weeks a year. And filberts. I mean, there's so many nut trees that do well here in Portland. So if we could do that, put that together, and let everybody realize that you don't have to work like a dog, all year round, just for a few weeks. That would be my dream. Because then you get the spiritual growth and the leadership growth, and the farmers would come out of the woodworks, and all these great creative artists would have, a whole 50 weeks to work on what they love to do and 2 weeks to harvest. And because once you do perennials, I mean, these black walnuts, those giant black walnuts drop nuts like mad every year. Once you put that in place, you get this momentum that every year you get a harvest. Just do a little pruning, no big deal.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson, and I'm in Portland, Oregon with Pam Leach. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks.
You you've got a Portland Permaculture Institute where we are located, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But you've also been very active in bringing peak oil to the awareness of folks in your community and your city commissioners. So I want to get to that, but first I want to get to, how did you get onto this path of paying attention to the earth, to resources, to to oil, all of that? How'd that get started?
About 12 years ago, we were living a normal, mainstream corporate American life, and at I think it was Borders bookstore, I came across a book called Your Money or Your Life. Just kind of thumbed through it. It sounded intriguing because I was interested in financial issues, and so picked it up, and we started following that path of paying attention to our spending and whether our spending matched our values, and it just caused a whole different shift in how we approached money and our life decisions.
I wanted to ask you about that because that also transformed our lives. We started to look at what is enough. I mean, that was the question, what is enough? Instead of more, the more game that we're all on in America, that advertising wants to make sure that we're all doing more.
Right.
So what did it do? So you set on that path, and I'm guessing that you followed it in terms of saving your money towards becoming financially independent, or at least your own definition of that.
Right. We figured out that there was more to do with our time than always earning more money and collecting more consumer things and always aiming for a bigger house or a better car, and instead saved our money, revised what we were doing with our savings, and were able then eventually to quit those corporate jobs and do what we thought was more valuable with our time.
And what was that?
It's been mostly trying to educate people about sustainability and the issues facing our environment and our economic system around resource depletion, but also focusing on the solution aspect rather than just wringing our hands, always running around worried.
Yeah, because it's really easy to say some version of the sky is falling, well, the sky is heating up, whatever, in climate change, or we're running out of silver or fish or whatever it is.
Right.
So as you started looking at how do you focus on solutions, what kinds of things came your way? What did you learn about? What did you study? What did you
I
see?
did a lot of reading about economic globalization and what that was doing to our resource base of the world, as well as people in poorer countries. Started looking for a solution that Joe and I could work on together as a couple. And then when we found permaculture, that kind of jumped out as, aha, that's it, because permaculture involves both growing food as well as the social justice and economic issues and the whole bigger picture of how we live our lives.
I didn't realize that permaculture went so broad. Most people think of permaculture as mostly the food growing. I mean, because that's what's visible and tangible and so on. But,
Right.
but does it have a critique or a point of view about economic social justice? Tell me just a little bit about that.
Yeah, the course does involve a segment about local currencies, and we teach people about globalization and the World Trade Organization and things like that, as well as now we've added peak oil to the curriculum. That wasn't a term when permaculture was
That's true.
founded,
That's
but we've
true.
now added that to the curriculum. And so it's definitely a component of, yeah, you can grow food, but what if you can't afford that land? How can you get access to the land even if you're not in a position to own it? And how can we then distribute the produce in a way that might be more fairly distributed across society and
that's,
things like that?
If you're going to be doing things about justice, then you're looking at kind of an equality here, or a valuing of each person, or that we're, you know, something that's the opposite of the haves and have-not split that the economic globalization is reinforcing, or is taking all the resources from some poor person in the Philippines or whatever.
Right. So for example, by us growing our own food or collecting our own rainwater, then hopefully we're taking some pressure off of those natural resources that can then be made available more fairly across the, not just human spectrum, but entire environmental spectrum.
Sure, we're sharing this planet with a lot of other beings that are under stress too by all of our usage. So are you teaching classes?
Yeah, we teach the permaculture design course, which is a total of 12 days. And we teach that over the spring and summer in a couple different varieties of flavors for people with different schedules. And
so how did you get involved with peak oil?
In Portland, we have a permaculture guild that has an informal potluck once a month. And several years ago, a friend of ours came and he was just talking about peak oil endlessly, about how it was such a big deal and we should pay attention to it. So I paid attention to him and did Google it and started reading all kinds of books by Richard Heinberg, and then ultimately Long Emergency and all the standard, literally all of the standard
Well, it's
books.
interesting. We have not done too many shows on peak oil itself, so I'm interested to have you name, what you came across that really spoke to you. I mean, because for some of our viewers, it's not the standards yet for them.
Okay. Richard Heinberg's two books. Power Down is my favorite of his two books, and then James Howard Kunstler wrote The Long Emergency, which is pretty much a doom and gloom side of peak oil.
He has it in for the suburbs. I mean, he says the suburbs are a disaster waiting to happen, a cul-de-sac that isn't going to. That he doesn't have a lot of prospects for the future, and I'm hoping that we have more creative solutions than he imagined because the suburbs are here.
Right.
So we're going to have to be creative.
David Holmgren, the co-founder of Permaculture, has written several articles about how we could retrofit the suburbs to make them more sustainable, acknowledging, which is what I agree with, and which is why we're in the city doing permaculture, is we've sunk all of our resources into the cities and suburbs. And so how can we realistically walk away with them? We have to figure out how to use
what we have.
And that's why we're in the city.
I mean, part of why we have the big cities and we have the suburbs is all that cheap oil.
Right.
Right.
And so
that enabled not only the cars but all the material things that we have here. I'm heartened. What kind of ideas does he have on how to retrofit?
Well, he said all the streets would be good rainwater collection systems.
Of course. There.
And very simple stuff like, taking the fences down and making all the interior spaces large gardens.
Yes. So you share with your neighbor, take the fences down and share that space so that And probably plantings out in front by sidewalks, or take the sidewalks out and
cottage industries in the garages, and sort of making each little suburban neighborhood its own village center with its own economic base. And he says it's going to take several generations, because we've taken a long time to get where we are, so it's going to take several generations for us to figure out what that future sustainability looks like, but we just keep working at it.
So you read Richard Heinberg, Kunstler, as you mentioned, probably other things.
Matt Simon's Twilight in the Desert.
Saying that Saudi Arabia has far less oil than they may be telling us. It may be on decline. Yeah, he's an investment banker that, you know, you listen to him. Because he's putting his money, or his clients' money into
And he's
this.
a Republican.
Yeah, yeah. So he has that conservative bent that we
Right.
absolutely need to have about a resource that's on decline.
Right.
So that led to, what kind of things did that lead to here in Portland about responding to just the peak oil aspect of things? You formed some groups?
Well, when I started researching, and I found out through the internet, there was a small group meeting once a month in Portland. It just had like 4 to 6 people once a month. So I told kind of the permaculture circles that this group was meeting, and so we all started going to those meetings, and that grew the population of those meetings to the point where we had enough energy to start meeting more frequently and doing more things.
So that's Portland Peak Oil?
That's what we call our group now.
Portland Peak Oil, and you meet weekly?
We've met every week since last June, so
June of 05, right?
June of 05.
Well, I'm impressed.
One of our members got a local church whose membership was concerned enough about peak oil to donate their space for us to meet in.
Wonderful. So not terribly long ago, tell us the story of how you got into bringing a resolution to your city commissioners about peak oil, because you put yourselves on the map there in the world for that, and you were a shaker and mover on that one. So
I did what I could do. Basically, we knew that from hearing speakers and reading books, there was a collective sense that the changes weren't going to come from like the federal government. The changes had to very much come from as local as possible. I had been to some city council meetings for other issues, and so I had a sense that our city council was maybe ready for this issue. They turned out to be more ready than I had hoped for.
Well, now you had your commissioners had already signed on to the Kyoto Protocol. Is that right?
Correct. They'd already,
at that point.
Right, and they had already done a project where they'd inventoried all city-owned lands to see about their suitability for growing food. And in that vote, several of them had said that their motivation for getting more food in the city was their concern about fossil fuel.
Oh, interesting. So you already had an aware set of commissioners on this issue.
I wouldn't say they knew the term peak oil at
Sure.
that point, but they knew
scarcity was. I mean, it's coming down the road here somewhere.
Right.
So what's happening now? Out of that was just a few months. This was what,
That was in May
of 06. So here we are in August of 06. What's next? What's happening now with that?
Well, the resolution included the appointment of a 12-person citizen task force, and they've met several times already and broken into subgroups of different areas. First, they're going to research how peak oil will impact various aspects of the citizens of Portland's lives, and then make recommendations that the City Council could implement, hopefully, to help mitigate some of those impacts.
I mean, it must be boggling. You're on the task force? Is that right? Or are you?
No, running this farm, I opted not to apply to be on the task force. I've gone to every meeting. I'm on one of the food subgroup, but I'm not officially on the task force.
So you're a major contributor without being responsible for having to stay with it for the whole time.
Correct, because I have other things going on too.
No, alive.
Yeah.
What I saw, we got a chance to go briefly to the meeting the other night, and I see that oil being so pervasive. I mean, it's our bloodline in our industrial society. All the areas that all of your task force are having to pay attention to, which are so interconnected, I mean, it's an overwhelming looking task. And somehow that group is having to find a way to make it bite-sized or human-sized to work with. Do you feel heartened? Do you feel like You know, where do you think that's going to, do you have any sense of how that's going to play out?
I think the task force is going to come up with some very valid recommendations. I think the rubber's going to meet the road when the city council might actually be considering tax changes or ordinances that will actually affect the business community or affect the daily lives of citizens. At that point, I think there's going to be a lot more people involved.
I'll bet there are.
So we'll have to see. At this point, there's really no opposition to it because the city hasn't passed any laws or anything.
Sure. They're not taxing you if you don't have a rainwater catchment system or you know, giving you incentives to grow your own food and so on. Speaking of which, in our last 5 minutes here, you have embarked upon a project here with your permaculture farm to sort of, what would I say? It looks to me like put your money where your mouth is, or walking your talk about embodying some of what could work in a post-oil kind of future. Can you tell us a little bit about why you set out to do this?
Because we think, we know that all the population centers are in cities, and if we're going to move to a sustainable culture, we think that the cities are going to have to figure out how to be sustainable. There's certainly not enough land for every family to go out and start their own rural homestead.
That's
so
for sure.
we opted to be in the city and do what we can do to demonstrate and teach and show examples of how we could change how we're living in the city as oil gets more and more expensive.
Do you think that the city of Portland could even feed itself from within its own boundaries?
Maybe not totally within its own boundaries, but because of our planning at the urban growth boundary, there's still a lot of very, very close surrounding farmland that would be within a hardy young person's bike ride with a trailer to deliver food. So I think if you include that just around the urban area, I think there'd be enough. Similar to the Cuban experience, which I don't know if you've covered that in the show or not.
Only a little bit. In Cuba, when peak oil came artificially, if you will, when the Russian Empire or Russian country went down, and the oil, you know, dried up. I know that they went out and had agriculture around and within the city. A great deal, actually, something 40 or 50%, a huge amount came from within the city.
Yeah, it's well over 50% comes within the city. Of course, their produce, not their calories necessarily, but their produce.
Their fruits and vegetables and so on. Of course, they're in a warmer all year round climate, so they can perhaps grow more intensely. You in Oregon have been smart enough to do an urban growth boundary. Not every state, and certainly California, where I come from, has not done that, and we are sprawling out into our agricultural lands to the dismay of many of us. But that's a heartening thing for me to hear, that a good portion of what you Portlanders could need, you could be growing right here and within a short distance.
Yeah, because there's a lot of exported food right now that leaves the state to the rest of the country, as well as a lot of our grain apparently goes to China. So if that becomes too expensive to ship to China because of the cost of the fuel, then that food will
get to stay. Well, hopefully it gets to stay home.
Hopefully it gets to stay here, yeah.
So in this whole movement, we've got about 2 minutes here. What gives you hope? What inspires you? And this whole, I mean, it's big changes you're talking about likely happening here in the next 10, 15, 20 years. What inspires you?
Well, big hope was the receptiveness of our local city council, but on a larger spectrum. I know there's writers like Kunstler who say that we're going to have a hard time, but at the same time we have so much surplus. We drive big cars with single people in it. We throw away a lot of food. We use a lot of energy in packaging that's not necessary. I think there's a lot we could do to reduce our fuel usage without having some of the dire scenarios that people write about if we chose to do it. And
so what you're talking about is really starting, in a sense, by using less, conserving, and it's not about, I don't hear deprivation here, I hear take away the waste that we have in the system and make waste so we don't have waste, so things are used.
Right, that's the ultimate sustainable concept, is that there would be there'd be no waste in any system. It would all be closed loops, but we can at least start closing those loops, and that all saves energy and reduces global warming and affects a lot of the issues that we're.
I bet you sleep
we're
well at
talking about.
night knowing that you're doing things that you feel are, are moving in the right direction towards the next generations.
Well, some of us at Portland Peak Oil say how well we sleep or how nervous we are depends on what we're reading on the internet that day. If certain websites have dire things, then we may not feel so good that day. We still have our ups and downs because of
Sure.
oil prices or whatever,
Right.
but generally speaking, yeah, we feel like we're moving in a positive direction.
Thank you for
Yeah.
this. I'm going to close off with you for right now, and I want to thank you for sharing with me, and I want to meet Joe, your husband, and get a little bit of a tour here at your permaculture site in the middle of the city. Thank you for
Okay.
joining me.
Thanks.
I'm here with Joe Leach, who I think must be the wizard of the Portland Permaculture Institute. I mean, I see loving touches all over this land. Tell me what you're doing here.
What we're doing is just using really good observation skills that we've developed to see what's going on and trying to develop something that looks like it's going to work really well here. For example, we noticed when we first got here that one of our main areas to grow things was shaded by some poplar trees. And so we spoke to the apartment owners where the poplar trees were and explained that wouldn't work very well for us and asked them what would work for them in terms of fruit trees. And so we went ahead and chopped those poplar trees down and turned them into mushroom generating logs.
Okay, all right.
And then we proceeded to plant their favorite fruit trees and figs and grapes.
Aha. So you did some sharing here.
Yes.
Something that would work for both of you and got them involved with some of their growing.
Absolutely.
It's exciting.
Yeah. And we're also doing that by just observing what's going on in the neighborhood. We have, for example, gathered apples from various parts of the neighborhood and have been making cider very regularly. And many times the apples are not being used and they're just discarded on the ground. But we make very good use of them with cider.
So you've got, you're growing vegetables. There are already mature fruit trees here. What else do you have happening on this? And how much land do you have?
That's 1.6 acres.
And you're right in the middle. I mean, you've got city all around you. I mean, it's sort of this little island.
Yes. Yes, it's somewhat of an oasis. We have 3 full-size black walnuts. We have 7 fig trees that are just doing incredibly well since we brought the zoo poo in and fertilized
The zoo
them.
poo, hello?
Zoo poo is the poop from the zoo.
Serious?
Yeah.
From the Portland Zoo?
Yeah.
My goodness. So
Yeah.
you must have a good-sized composting
Lots of
system
composting
here.
systems going on. Lots of recycling of kitchen wastes, and we're bringing in occasionally some outside fertilizers like alpaca poop and
I like that.
things.
Zoo poop, that's the best.
Zoo poop is what it is.
I also noticed really big rainwater catchment. Talk to me about that. And how do you know how
Yeah.
much you need and how much to have?
The simple formula that I tell people is for a 1,000 square foot roof, which is a standard house, that you'll get 600 gallons of water for every inch of rain.
All right, so every inch of rain that you get on the rainfall measures, that 1,000 square foot roof, if you're collecting it all,
Right. Is 600 gallons of water.
now how much do you, and then how do you figure how much do you need?
Well, it depends on what type of crop you're growing, but typically you need 1 inch of water per week for the area to water things.
Okay.
So depending
So
how
if you-
big
but
your
your
gardens
area
are,
is.
figure your area out and you can figure out what your watering needs are. We figured that we'll need for this property about 20 to 30,000 gallons
For your dry season.
for our dry
Is
season.
that right?
Yeah.
So how much do you have in right now?
Right now we have 1 3,000 gallon cistern and 2 1,500 gallon
Okay,
cisterns.
so you've got 6. So you're what, a tenth of the way there?
Yeah, we're a third or
A
so.
third? That's
yeah.
right. Okay.
But still, it's conservative. That's a very conservative number. It's better to have more and then to share it with other people.
What are you using for cisterns? I mean, these look plastic. I
They're
mean,
big. They're big, and they're high density polyethylene. They are primarily used for water. They're designed for water.
Okay.
They have the ability to last about 25 years unless you paint them or cover them with cement of some type, mortar, and then they last indefinitely.
Really?
Yeah.
So are you thinking of just having just a series of these tanks sort of somewhere? Or?
Yeah, it's more like an array, a whole array of them. So, because they're pretty easy to come by. You know, you can get, for under $600, you can get a 1,500-gallon tank.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I wish you well. I think this
Thank
is a
you.
fabulous adventure. I want to say I enjoyed getting to meet the chickens, and you also have among the biggest pumpkins I've ever seen. I figured the Cinderella was ready to...
Did you get a chance to check out our thornless blackberries?
No.
Oh, we've got giant fruit this big, I mean, around.
Okay. I'd like a little tour after this.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
You're
and
welcome.
The model that you are and your inspiration to all of us.
Welcome, Janaea.
You're watching Peak Moment, community responses for a changing energy future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Join us next time.